Welcome to another edition of From the Other Side here on Pittsburgh Sports Live and, of course, WV Sports Now. Your West Virginia Mountaineers coming off of the biggest win of the season, maybe even the biggest win of Neal Brown's tenure as WVU head coach with a victory over Kansas State. Just last week, I touched on all of that and kind of the pressure on him now to change the corner and show that his tenure is different than his predecessor on my most recent show here on our outlets. But for this broadcast, I'm going to preview West Virginia's game with Texas, upcoming game with Texas. These two teams both 4-2 on the year, so we'll see what happens the rest of the season and kind of see where these programs are in this game, as both maybe have reason to not be so sure. Again, I'm your host here, Mike Asti, and I'm going to be joined alongside by Brian Davis, who is a long-tenured reporter covering UT down there in Austin, Texas. Again, as I told him before we started the show, one of my favorite cities in the country at the Austin American-Statesman. So, Brian, first off, I definitely appreciate the time. Got a little hungry there with dinner in front of me from your Twitter background, and I will say the barbecue in Austin and the food there in general is awesome. So I definitely appreciate everything about the city. I kind of actually have, I don't know if you've ever been up to Morgantown. I'm assuming you probably have by now.
Oh, yeah.
But I kind of tell people, I kind of tell people that Austin, Texas is kind of like Morgantown, West Virginia on steroids. It's a bigger version of a college town, kind of like Morgantown a little bit, but that much bigger. So I definitely appreciate the time, though, man.
You bet, no problem.
Absolutely. So I do want to kind of get underway. These two teams kind of had a little bit similar past this year. I mean, both have big wins, both have maybe not so great losses, both right now 4-2. UT has some winnable games in front of them, and Texas now crawling back in the top 25 at 22. But what should Mountaineer fans expect out of this Texas team? Because, of course, at the end of last season, you have the shouting of "we're back." Then you have kind of the bumpy road earlier in this year. Right now, a 4-2 team. You lose the game with Oklahoma. That I'm sure sticks in UT fans' craw, especially with this being an Oklahoma team going through a little bit of a rebuild, or as much as that can be for that program. So I'm sure that's one that maybe could ruin this being a special year and one the Texas fans wish they could have back. But nonetheless, coming off of a victory over Oklahoma State and Texas kind of solidifying the Big 12 not being a part of the playoff this year in all intents and purposes. But with that being said, what is the expectation for Texas, and what should Mountaineer fans expect out of Texas entering this game?
Well, the one thing I would say to that first off is that I can't tell you what West Virginia fans should expect, because Texas fans don't know what to expect out of this team. The only thing that this program is consistent at is inconsistency, right?
Okay.
There is nothing more frustrating than being a Texas fan that plays up or down to its opponent. Last week, Oklahoma State was ranked number 6 in the country, so you knew the Longhorns were going to play up. But this is a team that couldn't put away Baylor. They struggled in the fourth quarter against Baylor. They were double-digit favorites against TCU, couldn't put TCU away, then fumbled on the 1-yard line in what would have been a game-clinching touchdown. And then obviously you mentioned the debacle at the Cotton Bowl this year. A lot of people here feel like if you cannot beat a 2-loss Oklahoma team with a senior quarterback this year, then, it may not happen for you, Tom Herman. I mean, there's a lot of people that are really, really down on the head coach here right now. This was supposed to be Texas's year. This was supposed to be the year that they were supposed to have a special season. Sam Mellinger being a senior, a lot of good offensive weapons. And even the coaching staff internally, they thought to themselves, this fourth year, all of our recruits, this is going to be the year, right? And so, it's very easy to say, well, the pandemic has thrown everything out of whack. But the fact is that, that didn't change anything for Texas. I mean, all of their goals were still in front of them and everything was still there. So you're right. They have clawed back into the top 25. They have crawled back into the Big 12 championship race. But I got to be honest, and I'm not just saying this for West Virginia fans, but I think this is a much tougher game for Texas on paper than people really think. I think West Virginia is a much, much better team than people really know, especially people outside of, the West Virginia bubble, right? And so I'm expecting a damn good dogfight on Saturday from both clubs.
Well, I'm kind of expecting that too, but it's kind of what you're saying. I could say the same thing if you were having me on a show, where the reason why this is a game that could catch up on Texas is because West Virginia has had that recent memory, and they did it this year of playing up to teams and down to others. And that's why it's big on Neal Brown to get another big win and kind of set the tone that this is not going to be the same old Mountaineers that play up to some and down to others. But so far this year, West Virginia dealing with that bad loss to Texas Tech. West Virginia able to handle Baylor, but then they lose to Oklahoma State and kind of figure that. But the Mountaineers, prior to last week, if you were playing WVU a week ago, I would have to be really negative. I mean, certainly that was the case going into the Kansas State game, where the expectations weren't there because not only the Texas Tech loss, but not playing that well even against lowly Kansas. So the same can be said for both sides. I do want to ask you the perception of Texas fans about the Texas program, because you're touching on the head coach, you're touching on it being the fourth year. That is where WVU and Texas differ for this year. They're both playing up to some, playing down to others. They're both seemingly back in the race, certainly if they get this win. And maybe it's a year ahead of WVU's expectations, but Texas is in the fourth year with the head coach, West Virginia only in the second. And in college football, after that third year, you have your recruits in there. No longer can you have the excuse. Neal Brown has another year cushion, not the case for UT. So because they're back in the championship picture, even though it's because maybe just chaos all around him kind of pushed them there, can that save the perception? Is he on, a hot seat that this year could end up where he's fired despite a pandemic? And where do the fans lie right now on the regime?
Look, there's no doubt that Tom is on a super hot seat right now.
Okay.
And there's no real nice way to spin it. He has got to win games. This is a team that right now they might be 4-2. Okay. But I could build you a case that they finish 6-4, right? I could build you a case that they finish 5-5, right?
Okay.
I mean, that is the thin line right now with this team. But I can't.
Or they finish 7, or they finish 8-2. Yeah,
absolutely. The other way is absolutely true, no question about it. And Tom is in a situation where he needs to win more than he loses going out, because there's been a lot of things that have happened off the field this year, as I'm sure you probably know. A lot of social justice issues, big uproar here over the school song that has led to a whole lot of other craziness. Right. So the thing is that it's not one incident that ever triggers a coaching change. It's always the accumulation of everything. Right. And if Tom doesn't have those wins to kind of keep the Wolves at bay, then pandemic or not, I could see Texas making a change. Now, that said, I think that the Oklahoma State win turned down the gas furnace dramatically. I really do. I really, really do. And so that's why it's critical. If you're a Texas fan who wants to see Tom Herman State, that's why it is critical that they have a win this week. They need to continue to build on a win over Baylor, win over O State. You got to win at home, right? Especially when you're about a 7-touchdown favorite at home. I mean, Tom is only 11-7 in situations where Texas is ranked and the opponent is not ranked. He's 11-7 in those situations. I mean, that's terrible.
And that's this weekend.
Absolutely. That's exactly this weekend. So when you look at what Clemson does, what Nick Saban does, Dabo and then Nick Saban, they annihilate unranked teams.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. And so that's what good programs are expected to do. And so, I can tell you at least here, a lot of people here don't really care so much about the X's and O's of it. It's more like an up-down referendum, on the leadership, and fair or not, that's where we are here in the fourth year of this coach's program.
Yeah, and again, the fourth year is a big part of this too, because the recruits are there. It's a veteran team, unlike, say, WVU again, who's kind of going through a rebuilding with a little bit of a younger team now. Talking with Brian Davis, reporter with the Austin American-Statesman there. WVU having that game with Texas Tech coming up, and a game that we'll get to in a second, if that's a rivalry game for the Mountaineers here. Mike Asti on Pittsburgh Sports Live and, of course, WV Sports Now. Where does the administration lie with him, though? Because you mentioned the social justice issues. That's another thing that maybe is comparable with these two head coaches right now, even though there are different times with their program. Neal Brown only in his second and Tom in his fourth, with the fact that Neal Brown had to go the entire offseason, eventually had to fire his defensive coordinator, his friend, based on social justice issues, having to deal with that, and even West Virginia dealing with the BLM stickers on their helmet and fans kind of not loving that in one segment of the population. So
I can't imagine a red state would be not in favor of that. Right.
Right. That's how basically that's how I can quickly gloss over it, so we don't have to talk about it any further. But yeah, that went on. And fortunately, no matter what side anybody falls, the conversation about Vic Koenig has dissipated because the defense has actually played well this year. So it has not affected the product on the field. If it had, certainly that would, I'm sure, be revving up the engines again. But Shane Lyons, the WAD, had tons of confidence in Neal Brown, even publicly said he's in lockstep with whatever Brown's decision was that whole time. Is that similar to what's going on then down there in Texas? Or have you been able to read any tea leaves in terms of the administration's comfort?
Well, what I could say to that is I go back to what happened in last offseason, right?
Okay.
Remember that they are signed, they are married with Herman through 2023, okay? And that's all guaranteed money. If they decide to fire Tom Herman now, they owe him $15 million. Right. So it is in Texas's best interest to make it work, right? Okay, so go back to last offseason. 3 years in, Tom needed to shake it up. Chris O'Connell gave the green light for Tom to basically blow up his entire staff and hire new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator, 7 new coaches, right? 7 new, which is a crazy high number.
That is,
really think about
for
it.
College, for sure.
And for college football, that's a crazy high number, right? Okay, So the AD wants this to work. Texas administrators, they want this to work. And it's not because of how much money they owe him.
I was going to ask you, though, because it says there wasn't a flash hire. This was not a flashy hire when it was made.
They want Tom Herman to be the head coach. And I can tell you for a fact that Tom Herman wants to be the head coach. Right?
I'm sure he does.
Absolutely. But
it's a good job. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great job, great fertile recruiting area. You're in the state of Texas. You're the flagship school. I mean, there's a bazillion reasons why you want this to work. But as I told Tom in a conversation his first year, just win the bleeping games. Right. Get that. Listen, that's all you have to do is just win the bleeping games. Right. And then everything else takes care of itself. And so you asked me, is the AD in lockstep with him? Yeah, I absolutely think they are.
Okay.
But you got to remember too, DeLoss Dodds, who was the longtime famous athletic director here, he was in lockstep with every coach that he hired too, right up until the moment he shot him in the face. Right?
Yeah.
Right up until the moment he executed him. So it's the same thing with any athletic director. They will support you 100% until the moment they make a change.
Right? I also would imagine that among Texas fans, especially this year, because this is the year that Oklahoma was the most vulnerable in probably a decade. So if you're going to go through an 8-2 year, or even if it be 7-3 or 6, whatever, and it's going to be where you're vying for a conference title and nothing more, and it's because of chaos, I'm sure Texas fans would rather lose to West Virginia in some reality than have that be an Oklahoma loss, maybe. Just because this was the year that you could potentially pick them off. You don't get it done. So that is a bitter taste there, because this is an Oklahoma team that's barely, they're flirting with the top 25 as well. So I'm sure that stings more.
Well, sure. And when I think of West Virginia, and we can get into the back and forth.
Because that certainly segues.
That's a good segue.
Yeah.
What I think of is obviously I still think of Dana, and I think of what happened here 2 years ago with Will Greer, the horns down, the whole bit.
So you think of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I personally thought it was awesome, right? I mean, it's totally cool. But I will say this, if I was describing to West Virginia fans what Texas thinks of the rivalry, they would honestly tell you that it's not. And
that's fair, and that's part of it. In order for it to be a rivalry, it does have to be on both sides.
Absolutely. And so, I remember last year, and I actually wrote about this. When we came to Morgantown last season. I was stunned at how many people had on some sort of T-shirt or pullover that had some sort of anti-Texas message on it. Right. Whether it was the shirt that just said "horns down" or or whatever. And I wrote that to my lead to my game story. Because if you're going to do something with the Texas logo, the university gets some money from that. So I wrote about how
I don't think they thought that through.
Texas administrators, they thought it was fantastic because they accept cash, check, or charge, right? And do whatever you want. Do whatever you want with the logo after that. So, West Virginia fans need to understand when you're buying things with Texas on it, you are contributing back to the Longhorns' coffers. Okay, so just remember that.
Right.
Which is why I've always laughed at the creativity of the fan bases. It's like, man, put more money into supporting your own team than you do hating on someone else, right?
That would be nice. And I do honestly, to be real here, I honestly do agree with you. It's hard for it to be a rivalry because, number one, the only real reason why it'd even be a conversation of it being a rivalry is because of West Virginia's recent win with the horns down and the way they got that win where they go for it at the end. Dana publicly says, I wanted to stick it in their face. Will Greer says it too. You see the horns down at the end. West Virginia made a big parade of this win. Unfortunately for the Mountaineers, the win did not end up meaning much for the program. The program's had big wins. It's not Texas, but it's a top 15 team program historically in terms of wins. There's been big wins, been bad losses, but there's big wins. If I'm ranking the biggest wins for WVU in the last 10 years, maybe it gets thrown in there, but it's certainly bottom of the list for me. Maybe not in there because it
definitely bottom of the list. Yes.
Yeah, certainly. There's other big wins to write home about. You don't need to focus on that, especially because that was a season that after that win, it just puttered away. It just the season didn't end up meaning anything. It did not end up getting momentum, and that's really the last positive moment of Dana Holgorsen as West Virginia head coach, really as well, unfortunately. And there certainly were other games coached. So that being said, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, from a fan rivalry standpoint. Texas fans have been more pissed off about how the basketball team has gone up there and been absolutely crushed by Huggy twice, especially this past season, right? And so it's funny. It really
that's where it kind of flips in terms of the more elite program. In terms of
that's true. But Texas fans, it's funny. They get more worked up about getting hammered by West Virginia basketball than they do with West Virginia football because of Oklahoma's here, Texas Tech is a thing. They got the thing with Baylor now, and so it's like
if Dana can get things going, he'll try to force a thing with between Houston and Texas.
Right, exactly. So again, it's I can honestly say it's not any sort of disrespect to West Virginia. Right. It's almost like hey, listen, we're full up on rivalries. Okay, go sell that somewhere else.
But I think the issue is, this is why it's not a rivalry too. You have the big win. The win doesn't end up meaning much for the Mountaineers. I do think why you saw all those T-shirts and all the venom from WVU fans, honestly, they're forcing the rivalry. They're trying to make this a rivalry. And there's two reasons. Number one, and this is no fault of the fan zone, because of conference realignment and being in the Big 12, they lost a lot of their rivals. So Mountaineer fan, win, lose, or draw, and the program's still been competitive now and seemingly turning things around, is lacking rivals. You even lose the game with Maryland this year because of COVID, and I could argue that out of the out-of-conference, close geographic rivals that West Virginia tries to peddle historically, Maryland's one of the worst ones for football. There's no big moment there. There's more of a big moment against Texas. That rivalry has no big moment historically, so they're not much of a rival, but at least it was one, and then that's gone because of COVID. So the Mountaineer fans are trying to force a rivalry because they don't have many. And speaking on Oklahoma again, Oklahoma, even going back to when Tavon Austin was at West Virginia and scoring all these points and 40-plus points a game, Oklahoma just annihilates West Virginia all the time. It's just they're consistently beating up on the Mountaineers. They're probably going to win the game this year as the season closes out, regardless of what they do. So Texas, because of the win recently, you can tell your fans, the reason why West Virginia is trying to make it a rivalry more than you don't see – there's not West Virginia fans wearing I hate Oklahoma shirts because Texas could be a rival they think they can competitively beat every now and then.
Sure.
That's why they're trying to make it a rivalry. Iowa State's been beating them up, even though they're not a better program. They lost to Oklahoma a bunch of times. They're struggling with everyone else, really, even if they're better programs. So Texas is a program they say, well, we have a big win, so let's cling on to it and then make that our rival so we can say we're one up on them in big games. That's really the honest truth of what's going on. that really is, whether they like it or not, that really is the case. But for me, too, I don't really think it's a rivalry. I can tell you maybe – do you think there's any chance it could become one? I guess is a better question. Maybe if we agree it's not currently a rival. I know you say you're full up on rivalries, but is there a chance for this to become a rivalry between West Virginia and Texas? Because, again, West Virginia needs some. they do.
Well, I think I genuinely think that this is where the geography prevents it. You know, because if you think about it, you know, when you talk about going to your rivals, you know, your fans drive to the game, they go to the game no matter where it's at, right? And so I've had so many Texas fans tell me that they go to every game but West Virginia. Just because
I'm sure
of the airfare and you fly to Pittsburgh.
I can tell you, I once drove from Morgantown to Austin, Texas.
Woo!
I've done it before. I've crossed all of those states. I've had some catfish in Nick's Catfish and BBQ in Carlisle, Arkansas. I've done it before, but it's a trek. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. So I mean, I hear you. Geography is the issue for West Virginia having rivals really at all in the conference. That is a negative for West Virginia in the conference, with other positives certainly being there. So
sure,
that certainly might be the issue that stops it. Maybe if I don't even know really if it'll make a difference on if Texas gets this win, because Mountaineers already have a bad loss on the resume, so they can blame it on that. So I don't know. This is a rivalry West Virginia is trying to force. I'm glad that Texas enjoys the marketability of this rivalry, and they can make money off this game. So I guess Texas wishes they can play West Virginia forever now, as long as they keep doing horns down and making money off of it. What are you? We talked about what Texas has the rest of the way and what Texas has been as a program here, but you have Kansas. So some of the winnable games are in front of you, unlike, say, the Mountaineers' schedule. Kansas is in front. Iowa State, that's going to be a toss-up game. They're certainly winnable. Kansas State, and WVU has beat Kansas State. Kansas State previously 16th in the country, but definitely a beatable team as well. So Texas does not have Murderers Row in front of them, depending on what goes on this weekend.
Right.
What are you expecting this Texas team to be the rest of the year, especially now where it can be sold to them that the playoffs probably not happening, of course, but you can be a Big 12 conference champion even though you kind of messed up earlier in the season.
Well, you know, to me, actually, that I've said from the very beginning of this season is that the minimum bar of success should be getting to Arlington, right? Not winning it, not winning the championship game, just getting to the title game, right?
Right. Got to get there to win. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And so I sort of feel like if they have 2 losses, even if they somehow magically could get there and had 3 losses, I think that'd be incredible.
You never know with the Big 12 this year, man.
Well, that's a good point. Because I think the league is going to continue to kind of beat up on each other.
I think so too. Right? Oklahoma State's going to lose again. I think Kansas State's going to lose again.
Yeah. So a 3-loss team in Arlington is definitely possible. There's no doubt.
Right.
You know, and if you somehow get to that game, then it becomes a roll of the dice, and who knows what happens. But man alive, if Texas somehow got there and won it, you know, happy days are here again. You know, here we go. Build a statue for this guy and the whole bit, right? Because here's the thing about it. People don't really realize how desolate it has been in the Texas football kingdom, you know, for quite a while.
I was going to ask, is that really the standard, though? Is that really what would happen? Because obviously it doesn't feel like it's that long ago, 2006 being the last Texas national title. It was a while prior to that.
Yeah, but you got to remember, but here's the thing, Mike. You got to remember that, and you know, don't tell any Texas fan I said this, okay? But this is a program that has been historically average with some blips of greatness. Right. That's what it is. And so you look through their history. You know, it's blandness, 7-8 win seasons. Hey, there's a 10 win season. Hey, there's an 11 win season. You know, Mac is the one who really elevated the idea of Texas greatness, you know, by having 9 double-digit winning seasons, right? But think about it. They've only won 3 Big 12 titles in the 25-year history of the league. That's not very good. That's really not very good.
That is hard to imagine, and that is true. I mean, maybe it's because Oklahoma's hogging a lot of them, but still.
Yeah, but it's still – I mean, I just think that for a program that is the most cash-rich athletic program in America that has literally everything. They have $225 million in revenue. They literally have anything that you could dream for the athletes. To only have 3 Big 12 titles is terrible, I think. That's a terrible batting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So
and you're doing it in the middle. You're doing it in the middle of Texas, where it's great high school football wise.
Correct. Absolutely. And so, you know, the big question that I get all the time is, why doesn't it work? Why can't it work? And the answer that I always give is, man, I don't know. If you know the answer, please tell people in Moncrief what the answer is of how to get it fixed. Right. But as I look at the thing about this, I look at this particular team specifically, right? As long as number 11 is on the field, you got a chance, right? If Sam Ehlinger is out there, you've got a chance. Week in, week out, absolutely. Sure. Right? Sure. Even if he is hobbled like he is right now, he's hurt. They will not go into his injury status, but he's not 100%. We know this from his deep ball throws and things like that.
And we're talking physical too.
Physically. And then the same thing defensively. As long as 46 is out there, as long as Joe Osai is out there running around causing havoc, you're gonna have a chance, right? Now that said, it's gonna take, you know, what is it? 11. It's gonna take 20 more guys on offense and defense, you know, to make it work, right? But they've got good running backs. I think that Roschon Johnson and Bijan Robinson are two good backs. I personally wish they would give Bijan more carries. Okay. But they won't. Keontae Ingram will be out this week with a high ankle sprain. That's something to watch for sure in the matchups. I really like Joshua Moore at receiver. I think he is a solid, a very, very good college receiving threat. They're doing more with the tight ends, which is very intriguing. I really like Jared Wiley, big guy. We've sort of been calling him sort of a Gronk starter kit, you know, in terms of his body, you know.
It's big words. Yeah.
Well, but they won't throw it to him, right? And so it's like, you know, what good does it do to recruit these athletes if you don't throw it to them and you don't use them, right?
Right.
So there's that. And then defensively, you know, their linebacking crew, at the start of the season, the linebacking crew was the biggest question mark about the defense. But Juwan Mitchell, DeMarvion Overshown, in my opinion, have made some good plays and made strides. They're coming on solid. The defensive backs have been sort of up and down, kind of like any defensive back group in this league is, quite frankly. You know, if you really think about it, it's impossible to play DB in this league.
No, right? You got to grade them on a curve, and the NFL's been doing so. But you got to grade them on a curve. If they're allowing 3 or less touchdowns a game, then that's the same as every other team allowing 1 almost in other conferences.
Yeah, absolutely. Jalen Green had an interception. Had a great pick of Spencer Sanders last week with a 41-yard return the other way. But they are having a problem with learning the new mechanics of how these coaches want them to play defense by playing the hands, things like that. So pass interference calls are ticking up a little bit with this team. But I like their defensive line in terms of something constructive. I think Osai Moro Ojimo, Keandre Coburn, Taquan Graham, Tavondre Sweat. I think these are guys that are coming along. They're coming along, kind of building momentum. And so, but the thing is, as we talked about at the very beginning, can these guys put it all together for 60 minutes, week in and week out? Here's the big stat that I've been writing, and this is a team. Think about this. This is a team that has had double-digit penalties in 4 of its 5 Big 12 games. That's terrible. That's awful football, right? And I don't know how any team is going to win when you're undisciplined like that. So they've got to clean that up. But again, it's never about talent with Texas. Texas always has talent. It's always about fundamentals and execution.
Again, it definitely seems that way because as we kind of get close to wrapping things up, I do want to ask you, talking about Texas's footing, being in Texas, high school football there, and all the rage that is, and kind of being that second-rate Big 12 team to even Oklahoma during the last 25 years. And while Texas has the more recent national title in 2006, they have the same number of national titles as Oklahoma in that span as well. So it's not like they're blowing Oklahoma out in really any part of things, and then even have the loss this year while OU is rebuilding. But your Texas, the Longhorn Network, the national program, what Vince Young also did to make that more of a national program, having Matthew McConaughey, it doesn't hurt either, too, having celebrities who are fans and very vocal of the program. So I do want to ask you, is it reasonable for Texas fans, or even anyone out there who just thinks of Texas, well, it should be this, to think Texas should be and can be an elite program vying for national championships and the playoff in the not-too-distant future? Or is what we're seeing with Texas, where they can get a Big 12 title if things break their way, more of the reality, even though that's going to be a tough pill to swallow, based on everything that goes on with that program? Do you think it should be even at a higher level?
Oh, I definitely think it should be at a higher level, and everybody up there will tell you that it should be at a higher level. But the fact remains, this is a football program that has not won a conference championship since 2009, right? I mean, listen, this has been a decade of crap down here. I mean,
That's a good quote. Yeah.
It's been a decade of crap,
Right.
3 straight losing seasons under Charlie Strong. I mean, think about it. They started the year, they started the decade, with a loss to Iowa State, where Tom Herman was the offensive coordinator, right? And the only good thing that happened those last few years under Mac was 2013. Then you had
Is recruiting part of it at all, though? Because you're in the hotbed of high school football. Are they losing any kids to Oklahoma, or what's going on?
Well, I think when you look at the sheer number of Division I FBS level athletes that this state produces, I mean they get their fair share. They do. I personally, I don't follow recruiting day to day.
Oh, right, yeah.
But when I show up in February, all 24/7 is telling me is how great the recruiting class is. I'm like, okay.
I know, that's what I'm seeing the numbers too, and I'm thinking this doesn't translate. But if you would think even more of those kids would stay home, it would turn around quicker. But maybe you can't. It's not even reasonable in a big state. You're not going to pull 100%.
No, and I also think too. Not to go too far down the recruiting rabbit hole, but I just feel like that with the rules changes that are going to be enacted, where you can have a free swap, one-time transfer. I think that recruiting it's already the Wild West, and it's going to become what's even wilder than the Wild West. I don't know, right?
You're going to see a lot more of grad transfers coming into play. You're for sure. You're going to see.
I think you're going to see a lot of mid career movement. If kids go somewhere, if guys go somewhere, they don't play first 2 years, they're going to be gone.
Yeah. Like a grad transfer, but earlier. Yeah, that's what they're going to do.
I just don't know how you stop that. Quite frankly, I don't know how you stop.
No, and of course, that's there because coaches could do the same thing, but that's a debate for another day. I mean, that's definitely going to affect things and make it more difficult. And obviously, there's been elite coaches, Nick Saban, that have been vocal against kind of that, but we'll see. I do want to ask you here again, Brian Davis, a reporter with the Austin American-Statesman, as we're previewing the Mountaineers game with UT, West Virginia, and Texas this coming Saturday. 2 4-2 teams, and I'll tell you, these are 2 teams that regardless who wins is probably how things will be the week after. If West Virginia gets this win, they're in a pretty good position for maybe that conference title game, and they're definitely a ranked team. If Texas would lose, their positioning is pretty much really difficult, and they're probably not a ranked team any further. But I do want to ask you just simply, if Texas wins the game, what went on? And if West Virginia gets the win, then what do you think would have occurred to predict?
Oh, what would have happened to get that outcome?
Yeah, basically, like if Texas wins, what do they have to do to win? And if Texas loses, what do you think occurred? Is it just tons of penalties?
I'll go with that first. If Texas loses the game, then that tells me that West Virginia had a great day on the ground, because that's clearly how West Virginia is winning games. They're running over people, running through people, right? I bet you if West Virginia finishes with 200 rushing yards, I bet they win comfortably. Right? I could see that happening. Texas, on the other hand, for them to win, they're going to need to keep creating some turnovers, I think. They've done a good job scoring, but they need to get off to better starts, I think, is one of their problems, is that they cannot continue to wait around and wait to sort of get hot at the end. Right, because that's what they do. Right. They are very slow plotting out of the gate, and then next thing you know, it's boom, 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 and they're like, oh my God, now they got to score like 20,000 points in the fourth quarter, right? I mean, that just seems like how it's been.
That's how you get a double overtime shootout where 40 plus
absolutely.
Points.
Well, remember, Texas has been in 3 overtime games this year, so
right.
That's what they're doing. So they've got to start better, which leads to finishing better, in my opinion. But I come back to, I feel like the whole game hinges on West Virginia's ability to ground and pound and run the clock. And I don't mind telling you, I'm going to pick West Virginia in the paper.
Okay.
The reason why is because of, like I was mentioning, Texas's inconsistency. They're too inconsistent for me, and a lot of people here know that I've been saying that the Beavos have lost the benefit of the doubt, right? You can't give them the benefit of the doubt anymore. I'm at a point with this program. You guys stop telling me how great you are and start showing me how great you are.
I'm sure nationally, and I can tell you nationally, that's a little annoying as well. Just because after every single big win, there's some statement, whether it even be on Twitter from a Texas player, we're back. And then, of course, last year at the end of the bowl game, we're back. And then you follow that up, it appears, with bad losses. So
with mediocrity. Yeah, they follow it up with mediocrity. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's where I'm at. I mean, am I willing to take one potential loss in the weekly picket line? Yes, I am. Right. Okay. I'm in second place right now, so I'll give away.
Okay.
Right? But
is there a cushion between you and third?
No, a little bit. Look, two games behind.
Okay.
Right. I'm 3 games off the pace. But no. But I would say, and I'm not picking, and I'm not going to pick West Virginia for shtick. I mean, I really do think that West Virginia, again, is a much better team on paper than people think. TCU came in here as double-digit dogs and just really laid it on them, I felt.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, Horns, you're tired of getting pushed. Let's go out there and see what you got. Show us what you got. And that's sort of how I feel about it.
And the pressure's on both of these two teams because the Mountaineer way, certainly under Daniel Holgorsen after that big Orange Bowl victory, and then so far this year and last year you can kind of give a mulligan during a rebuild, but it's big win, and Mountaineer fans I'm sure will tell you they could easily see a win over Texas and then somehow laying an egg to TCU, who they still have. And so that could certainly happen and could ruin their year as well. And if you get a win over Texas, I'm sure Mountaineer fans are then going to think, well, why couldn't you do it versus Texas Tech? But this also might be the year where these coaches can just say, well, it was 2020, because this has been chaos for everyone all around.
COVID.
Yeah, it's COVID in 2020 and
COVID.
It's crazy. And so if you're going to use an excuse, here it is.
It's like, yeah, Coach. Why did you call that play on third down? And on third and short, COVID.
Yeah. Well, I also like too is
we're gonna do COVID.
Well, Coach, is COVID not affecting the opponent as much as you? What's the difference? No.
They've been in a bubble. They've been in a bubble.
Exposed.
Yeah. We've had people licking us in the face all week. It's COVID.
Yeah, there's more masks over there, so that doesn't count. Yeah, so if you're gonna use something, you certainly can use COVID. But either way, I think these teams are going to. I also was talking to somebody on their show earlier that fans, I feel like, are getting back in a groove where the programs can say it, the coaches can say it, but the fans are no longer willing to hear COVID as much as why you're losing these games.
Without a doubt.
Because the talent's already been there. It's not like COVID was happening 2 years ago. The recruiting mostly was done. You had to do it on Zoom, but the kids are still 5 stars. So I definitely appreciate the time. Brian Davis with the Austin American-Statesman here. WVU 4-2, Texas 4-2. Texas is a ranked team at 22. Mountaineers not ranked yet, but could get there with a win. And certainly it looks like a winnable game for both teams, but also looks like a losable game. Maybe is the better word. It looks like a losable game for both teams as well. So again, thanks, Brian, for all of us here at the Now Family Network. Make sure to click subscribe here. Bottom of the video, help us get our content to you. I'm Mike Asti, and again, we're going to have football regardless of COVID. So more football is a good thing, even in the face of COVID. But no, Brian and I aren't going to hear COVID as an excuse for this team or this game or anything here the rest of the way. But I'm sure we'll have to hear about it on the Zoom chats nonetheless.